Hello, I'm Robert Emmett Hernan. I'm the head of Bluestack Productions, Inc., the publisher of Irish Environment, an online magazine covering environmental matters on the island of Ireland. We're here today for another series of conversations on environmental issues. I'm very pleased to welcome Siobhán Egan from BirdWatch Ireland.
Thank you for having me.
I'm delighted to see you here in the Bluestack Mountains of Donegal.
It's exciting to be here again.
Yes, you've been to Donegal many times.
A few times, yeah, but it's been a while. So
great. Well, welcome back. Siobhán, I wonder if you could tell the audience what generally what BirdWatch is and what it does.
Yeah, certainly. BirdWatch Ireland is Ireland's largest environmental NGO. And by largest, I mean in terms of membership, we've 14,000 members, and in terms of staff as well. So at the moment, we employ about 35 staff, and they're partially based in our Wicklow head office. But we also have offices in Letterkenny, actually, as well as Belmullet, and then outposted staff as well. So we're a large environmental NGO, and our focus is wildlife conservation. But our remit actually spans broader than that into broader environmental issues. And we are engaged in a number of different activities, policy and advocacy, which is my area, but also in reserve management and habitat management, so active conservation work for some of our priority species in Ireland. And as well as that, we have a branch base, which makes us different to a lot of other environmental NGOs as well. And our branches are pretty much nationwide. We've now 25 branches across the nation, and the branches are run on more of a club kind of basis, where through volunteers they set up their own committees, but they actively engage in sort of outreach programs with local schools and run activities and participate in some of our massive bits of survey work. And it's
you have huge numbers of people participating in the surveys, don't you?
For sure. Thousands, and that's really important because of course our survey work and our research is really our core raison d'etre. I mean, it's the evidence base that sort of gives us the rationale for getting involved in other policy areas and really guides our work. So surveys and research, and really now we're talking 40 or so years worth of monitoring and research. That is our core work. Reserves
that you manage, there's what, 475 acres that you either own or have leasehold rights to, or about?
Well, it could be about that. I mean, it really ranges from reserves that we are actively involved in managing. So our two bigger ones would be the Belmullet Termancara Reserve out in Mayo, and the second one is the East Coast Nature Reserve between Kilcool and Newcastle in Wicklow. And they're two big reserves that were bought through life funding. So they're more actively managed, but then there's other reserves that don't get much attention, and a lot of land is donated to us at different times, and so really it depends on what capacity we have to be able to turn those into more or less useful facilities, either for wildlife or for people. To be honest, that the level of involvement we can, or the level of commitment we can give to those land holdings just varies. But it's something that I think you'll see us grow into as an NGO, making those spaces more useful for people and for wildlife. It's certainly one of the ambitions of the organisations to make the most of that, because it's an incredible resource to have.
You're the head of the policy and advocacy team within BirdWatch, so tell us a little bit more about what that work entails.
Well, again, it's quite varied because, as I say, we use our data and our monitoring as our evidence based, and birds are, of course, indicators of a number of changes that are happening or not happening in our environment. So that brings us into policy areas, including agriculture, and at the moment, common agricultural policy at a EU level and a national level is a very live issue. Into fisheries as well, and managing our marine resources, and to some extent as well into climate. But to be honest, the emphasis at the moment is on agriculture and fisheries, and climate is cross-cutting all of those, of course. So our policy and advocacy work involves often working with other NGOs, so through the Environmental Pillar and the Irish Environmental Network as well, engaging with groups to progress one or other area. And in other cases, it's just ourselves pursuing one department or National Parks and Wildlife Service to get a piece of work done or a better emphasis on some particular area. So it ranges from European national policy right through to species-specific asks. So by way of example, the species-specific stuff might include rodenticide use and its impact on barn owls, for example. Whereas at an EU level, an example might be working with BirdLife International, because we're part of the BirdLife International Partnership too, to try and implement change in the Common Agricultural Policy. So it spans that vast area, and in between it might be working with Friends of the Earth, Coastwatch, Antashka, other NGOs to make submissions to the Framework for Sustainable Development in Ireland, for example.
And you work closely with the Royal Society for Protection of Birds in Northern Ireland, do you not?
That's right. So both the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, the RSPB, and ourselves would be BirdLife International partners. Right. Okay. So, and BirdLife has a European division based in Brussels and globally. So it's a global partnership, and it has 180 bird conservation organisations in it. So it's a pretty big player when it comes to EU policy. So they'd work pretty tightly with, say, Friends of the Earth Europe, with WWF, with Greenpeace, with other large environmental NGOs at a European level. BirdLife would be very active with. And then with the RSPB in Northern Ireland, of course, we've a particularly good relationship, which makes sense because the island as a whole needs specific actions done. So we would catch up with them, or try to at least catch up with them to pursue mutual areas of work. So an example of that would be a current project on curlew, on breeding curlew, which is a species that's shown really dramatic declines. We're into our last couple of 100 pairs of breeding curlew in Ireland. And we're working with the RSPB in Northern Ireland as part of a bigger project again, in the border counties, looking at habitat that is available and what needs to be done in order to try and bring back that breeding population. I should emphasise that our wintering population of curlew is doing okay, but we've a different population of breeding birds as well, and they're the ones. So over the last 20 years, we've gone from a few thousand pairs to literally less than 200, we think, now. So for some areas of work, we work pretty tightly with the RSPB in Northern Ireland, quite obviously, because there's the boundary that we're crossing, which is really important to do, and take an all-Ireland perspective as well.
Now, you also represent the Irish Environmental Network in European matters, are you?
Yeah, so a number of groups in the Irish Environmental Network are also part of the Environmental Pillar. And so I represent the Environmental Pillar on the European Economic and Social Committee.
Okay.
So there was a space made available for the environmental sector, and so there was an election process within the pillar, and now I represent the pillar on that committee, which it's a stakeholder body which was put into existence to advise the Commission on civil society's view on work that the Commission are doing. So it pretty much shadows the work of the Commission and produces opinions on different aspects of that work. And it should be civil society's input to the work of the Commission. I say should be because well, it's all very well if you're on it, but if you're not on it, you're not you're not there, and maybe in a lot of cases civil society isn't fully represented on the committee. But it varies very much depending on the member state and who's put forward and all that kind of stuff.
Now, another interesting kind of international twist is, I was on your website in one of your reports, you were talking about how there are certain birds who breed elsewhere and migrate to Ireland. Yeah. And then we have, I suppose that the cuckoo is one of those from Africa, comes here, isn't it?
That's right.
And then we have, you export certain birds, right, that breed here and go elsewhere. So do you ever get involved with those other countries, either the African countries where the cuckoo comes from and its habitat protections, and where the Irish bred birds migrate to? There's a couple, the Arctic terns, is it, to Antarctica? And,
that's right.
And the Manx shearwater, which goes to Brazil and Argentina. Are you in touch with those?
In some cases, yeah, and this is an area of really exciting work, and it also ties in with climate and habitat management on a large scale, so we should talk about that too. But yes, I mean, Ireland is particularly important for its breeding seabirds and also its wintering water birds. So the wintering water birds might come from Greenland or Iceland, and they come to Ireland to winter here, feed up, and then return to their breeding places. And as you say, equally we have species that come here to breed, like our terns. So you might have the roseate terns off on Rockabill Island outside of Dublin is the second most important colony of roseate tern, and they come just there to breed. You know, it's just incredible that apart from the Azores, this is the other place they choose to go off the Dublin coast.
And the weather's a bit different too, isn't it?
Tell you. So yeah, Ireland, due to its positioning on the planet, it just plays this really crucial role. And yeah, I suppose we own all those birds, whether it's the wintering part of their life cycle or the breeding part of their life cycle. And so remembering that we're part of a much bigger system for these species is really important.
Yeah.
In terms of our work then, we have a few examples where we're collaborating with other countries, and certainly as part of the BirdLife partnership, we have common goals, and in that way, luckily through that BirdLife partnership, we can pursue areas that might be of mutual interest. So it might be hunting of birds or shooting of birds that are on passage, say through Cyprus and Malta. Really big issue that cuts across all of the BirdLife partners, really the European ones, for their birds coming up through Africa, obviously. And then there's a more specific example, might be most recently for black-tailed godwits. There's a link up that's been made with one of our branches and members down in Cork with a school up in Siglafjord up in the north of Iceland who have the black-tailed godwits there during their breeding season. And the same birds are found in Cove during the winter. And in fact, it only takes them a week or so to get there. It's just incredible. And there's a ringing scheme now where the kids in Cove, so there's a link up with the schools and they Skype each other and share stories and songs and things.
Terrific.
Are based all based on this bird, on the black-tailed godwit. And it's really quite impressive to see that happening. And I think it's a really good example of what we could and should be doing more of, and that work was taken on, as I say, by a member of ours down in Cork.
One of the things that I was curious about in reading the report too, whether it was a 2020 vision maybe, that one of the problems is that that the Irish wet and species-rich grasslands has been turned into a biodiverse, poor ryegrass monoculture, and I'm wondering how that fits with the argument being made by the dairy industry and the farming group is that we have a grass-fed farming industry, and that's good carbon-wise because it's a much less carbon-intensive process than other places, and I think Brazil is the unstated example of that. But that seems to suggest in that report that grass-fed is not so terrific in terms of its diversity impacts. I wonder if you could talk about that in a few minutes.
Yeah, well, we've certainly seen over the last 30 years very dramatic declines in farmland birds. And we've also seen dramatic loss of wet grassland in particular, and of semi-natural grassland. And that's happened to the gain of a more monoculture pasture, this ryegrass mix that you're talking about. So yes, we've concerns about the long-term decline of biodiversity that's happened as a result of that. So to promote something as being sustainable on the basis of an ongoing decline in these species is quite alarming, and we would say that it's not good enough to pick out one element of what might define sustainable agriculture, like our carbon emissions. It's not good enough just to pick that one element and ignore all the other indicators that are showing a worrying, unsustainable trend in how our agriculture is going. So yes, we would have serious concerns about promoting that kind of agriculture as being sustainable when quite clearly the stats, the evidence base is showing something quite different. And we've certainly encouraged the farming sector and the Department of Agriculture and others to make sure they're looking at the broader evidence base that exists. And of course, at an EU level, farmland birds are part of the sustainability indicator class. So there's a pan-European farmland bird index, which is used as a measure of sustainability. So it's not like we're inventing anything new here. This is an existing criteria that needs to be looked at quite carefully.
Segue into another issue, and that is the whole alternative energy. And obviously there's this tradition of wind farms and the bird organizations. And I mean, my understanding from the Royal Society of Protection of Birds is that they're okay with wind farms, obviously with caveats depending on where they're placed. What's BirdWatch's well, experience with wind farms?
Oh, mixed experience. Certainly we're very keen to see the renewable energy sector grow with a view to achieving a low carbon future. So wind we'd see as being part of that mix. With that caveat that let's make sure we put these the infrastructure in the right places, and in the right, with using the right methods. So in the rush to put out our wind energy infrastructure, let's not do that at the cost of our wildlife, for example. And people like the RSPB have been able to show that it is possible to meet your wind energy targets without compromising your most important wildlife areas. And so it's making sure that realization happens here as well. Now, we've had mixed results in this area. Certainly the sector seemed to be really keen to get it right, but there's a lot of data missing, and there's an exercise that needs to be done to pull together the data so that they can make a more informed decision. A lot of the time the decisions are being made very quickly about where we put our infrastructure, and that so that's quite a fundamental flaw. Is
the concern about flight or flyways or flight patterns of the birds, or is it just even localized impacts on bird populations from the positioning or siting of the wind farms?
At the moment, it's both. So we've examples. So in the case of hen harrier, where it comes down to quite a site-based issue there, where a lot of our hen harrier, more upland sites already have a lot of forestry on them, for example. There might be multiple wind energy applications at different stages of planning or construction even. And in that case, it might be that there's a habitat displacement issue, where the birds may not be using areas that are now being either developed at some form of forestry or stage of forestry, or have wind farms on them. And it might be that we're looking at a displacement issue. So the habitat might physically be okay, but they're not using areas they were previously. So that's a very site-specific example. And in that case, there's a need to make sure we're doing really robust, scientifically based, appropriate assessments, following the legislation really well. In other cases, it's this flyway issue that you've raised, and it might be that you've hooper swans, for example, using an estuary, and yet travelling a number of kilometres inland to find their roosting or feeding sites. And in that case, they're travelling to what might not be a designated area for them, but is nonetheless an important part of what their ecological requirements are. And in that case, it might be the siting of overhead power lines needs to be thought about properly, or at least that there's an appropriate amount of information gathered so that they know what a potential impact will be. In some cases, the information hasn't been collected in order to assess whether there is or isn't an impact. And so we spend a lot of our time arguing that we need to make sure we've enough information to make an informed decision.
That may bring us to maybe the next to the last issue, and that is the relationship with tourism and upland walkings and that. What are the issues there for BirdWatch Ireland?
Well, there's some really positive things about the uplands and access to the uplands that BirdWatch Ireland are keen to promote, and that's about people engagement. It's one of the opportunities people have to really engage in wildlife, and there's positive parts to it. I think some of the more worrying things might be the potential for habitat erosion along paths that are really popular that need to be managed more, around disturbance during the breeding season. So you might have dogs off the lead, and there's brown nesting birds in the uplands that would be sensitive to that kind of thing. So it's a really mixed bag of positive and negative, but it's certainly an area where we'd see really good potential for increasing people engagement with wildlife. We, as BirdWatch Ireland, but also more broadly in the NGO sector, are very aware of and really want to work on more, getting our stories into the media, and communicating our messages in a better way is something we've seen as a gap we need to address. So.
Well, you just did.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, Siobha, for talking with us today.
Thank you very much.